So this is the syllabus for our class, or at least some key points. As you might have seen already, you should keep the block of time open from 11:30 to 4:30 on Mondays and Wednesdays. We will almost never meet for this entire duration. However, you should keep this time open because we will meet at least a little bit at 11:30, and there will always be some kind of assignment, something for you guys to do on your own time or together in breakout groups. Today, we certainly will not be staying until 4:30, so don't worry there. Tuesdays and Thursdays are always going to be meeting asynchronously. That is, I'm going to post a video and or an assignment for you guys to complete on your own time. They are almost, or these assignments are almost always due at the end of the day, so 11:59 on the day that they are technically assigned for, with a few exceptions. There is a schedule all the way on the last page of the syllabus that you can take a look at if you need a little bit more detail. We're going to go over that together today as well. So what you need for this class. Of course, you're all here right now, which means that you have some kind of device that's capable of using Zoom. There will be a couple instances where you will be required to either take photos or videos. So hopefully you have that capability as well. If you don't, reach out to IT at Stockton and they have some loaner equipment for you. Okay. As I mentioned briefly in the video I sent you guys last week, the only required material for this class is a study and homework service called Mastering A&P. Maybe some of you guys have some experience with the mastering programs. There's Mastering Physics and Mastering Biology, all sorts of different things. We are going to use Mastering A&P. Again, it is the one required material for this class, right? You don't have to buy any dissection equipment or, goggles or a specific textbook or anything like that. This is what you absolutely need. Mastering A&P, or through Mastering A&P, I'm going to assign some homework assignments. And so you're going to do a series of homework assignments leading up to each of your 4 lecture exams. We're getting to that. Also, some of our laboratory exercises are going to be conducted through a Mastering A&P program. So it really is important that you guys purchase this service. Now, how exactly do you do that? Well, first you go to masteringamp.com, you type in this code right here, and it will take you to, a place where you give your money. Okay? There is an opportunity to buy access codes from other services, like you can go on Chegg and you can get an access code, but I have seen so many awful issues with this method before that I absolutely do not recommend it. There are just so many different editions of textbooks, and maybe your code is expired or all sorts of different things. The easiest and certainly most efficient way of getting access to this content is by just typing in this code and accessing it right away. Okay. Let me show you a little bit about what that looks like. All right, so I know this looks different for an instructor as opposed to students, like you won't have all this stuff, but you will have assignments, right? You can list them out, or there is a calendar component. I personally like the calendar, but whatever you like. So what we can see here is that there are 5 homework assignments that are going to be due the night before your first lecture exam, which is going to be on June 1st. After today, you will have been introduced to enough content to complete the first homework assignment. So homework number 1, introduction to the body and just basic body terms. Okay. Note that all of these assignments are due the night before the exam, but I highly encourage you to get started with those as quickly as possible. In fact, today, I hope that you guys can access Mastering A&P and begin the first homework assignment. The idea here is that, first of all, you are getting some practice answering questions about the content that we're going over. Secondly, you are getting some kind of easy points, right? So lecture exams can be pretty beefy. Not everyone is a good test taker. And so I have built into the course this extra 10% that will help to improve your grade. So there's not quite so much pressure on your lecture exams. Okay. Let's see, other things that are a part of mastering A&P. There are many resources in this study area. And again, this looks a little bit different on my end than yours, but the general concept is the same. You can study by chapter, right? So we're doing Intro to A&P today. There are little quizzes that you can take. There are little labeling activities. And if you are the type of person to appreciate an online textbook as opposed to a physical textbook, you can purchase a subscription for the e-text as well. And so when you type in this code here, it will give you the option of just the homework service or the homework service and the e-text as well. And again, the e-text is optional. If that's what you like, by all means, this is a great option. Okay. There's also some extra videos, so you can get a little bit of a different perspective on the content than just from me. Okay. All right. We are also going to be doing some PhysioX laboratories. So PhysioX, other laboratory study materials, and so on. I will remind you of these as we continue in the class. Okay. So today's goal is to gain access to mastering A&P and kind of get used to that content. Okay, now there are some other things that I do recommend. There is a textbook, this one here, that is recommended. All of the chapters and the page numbers and figure numbers that I'm going to present to you are from this textbook. So if you want to know, exactly where to go to reference particular content, this book is what I'm going to be talking about. However, for the most part, A&P books are A&P books. If your cousin has an A&P book laying around, or a sibling or a roommate or whatever, you are more than welcome to use a different A&P textbook. That's totally fine. For the most part, these books are just there to supplement your understanding. All of the lecture material and the lecture exam questions are going to come from my PowerPoints and extra drawings and such. Okay, so you'll never have any specific readings or specific questions to answer directly from the textbook, but this is the one that I'm kind of working off of. If you don't want to buy this, again, borrow a book from somebody. There are even online free textbooks that you are welcome to and encouraged to use. OpenStax is a great resource. Their anatomy and physiology textbook is pretty good. So again, that is free. So hopefully the only money you have to spend on this class is for this program. Okay. If you take my class in the fall, I'm going to use this program again, and your subscription will last all the way through the fall. So hopefully just this one thing for both sections. Other things that I recommend, anatomy coloring books. Yes, maybe it seems a little juvenile, but actually sitting down and coloring structures will help you to recognize where they are related to other structures. So spatial relationships, it will help you recognize the specific shapes. And it's a great relaxed way to be engaging with the content. Okay, so you don't just have to, write stuff out all the time. You don't have to just stare at your notes. This is helping you to learn the material without a lot of the pressure and a lot of the stress. Okay, the one that I specifically recommend is this Caput and Elson one. This is reflective of the level of detail that we have in this class. Okay, other things that I recommend. Colored pencils, colored pens, as we're going to do a little bit later today. We are going to be labeling diagrams. We're going to be drawing out different processes, and it is really helpful if you guys have a lot of different colors so that you can see the contrast and see the differences. Another thing that I recommend are plastic sheet protectors. So you can get these at Staples or Walmart or whatever. This here is An example of what I made like back in the day when I was learning all this stuff. What this is and what I recommend for you guys to do is to look in the textbook or on an online source for anatomical prefixes, anatomical roots, and anatomical suffixes. And so if you look really closely here, you can see that here is the anatomy word, here is the translation. And so as you are introduced to a new term, which looks big and clunky and scary, and you have no idea what it means, what you can do is literally go to your nice, protected, indestructible, in the sheet protector list and essentially translate that word. So you know essentially what you're looking for, what the structure does, where it is, what's wrong with it, those types of things. And so the fact that this is in a sheet protector means that it's been able to live for a very long time being carried around in my backpack. And it's still, to this day, used as a reference. Okay. The other thing that I'm going to, that I'd like to point out as a benefit to these sheet protectors is that you can draw on them with expo markers, so with dry erase markers, and erase, and draw and erase. And so this will be really important for learning structures for labeling models, labeling images. So you don't have to print out an entire forest worth of trees in order to practice writing out these structures. Instead, slip the paper in the sheet protector, practice your writing, check your answers, and wipe it off and start again. Okay, so just some things that have been helpful to previous students and to myself as well. Questions? Lots of logistical things today, but hopefully this sets you guys up to succeed in this pretty fast course. Okay. What you're surely all wondering about are the grades. First of all, let me point out the grading scale, pretty standard with one exception, and that is there's no C-. That is not a typo, that is on purpose. A lot of programs do not grant credit for this course unless you get a C or higher. And so I recognize that, you know, this course has a reputation. It is very challenging, and I ask you guys to step up in a lot of ways, particularly in the summer. It just moves so quickly. And so the difference between, you know, a 72, 73, 74, I don't think that warrants, you know, passing versus not passing the course. So a C is above 70, right? So instead of above 73, it's above a 70. Okay, so your grades will reflect that at the end of the term. Okay. Grading breakdown. This course includes both lecture and laboratory components. In the summer, these two bleed together so much, particularly online. It doesn't even feel like they're two separate courses. So hopefully that will be good for you guys. But in actuality, 72% of your grade comes from lecture content and 28% comes from lab content. Again, these bleed together a lot in the summer, particularly online. We have 4 lecture exams, each worth 10%. Before each lecture exam, there is going to be a quiz worth 3%. Okay. As you saw a few minutes ago, mastering A&P homework, there are going to be 3 to 6 assignments leading up to each and every lecture exam. The sum of all of those scores put together is going to count towards your grade. So 2.5% is the sum of all lecture or all mastering A&P content leading up to lecture exam 1. Okay. There are a series of lecture assignments. Not all of them are created equally. Some of them are, you know, simply doing a Kahoot. They're simply doing an Ed puzzle or some kind of really simple exercise that is meant to help you see what the important facts are. But they're not graded for accuracy. It's pretty much if you do the whole thing, you get full credit. So some of those are, you know, yeah, some of the lecture assignments are something simple like that. Others are a little bit more complex, and so they will be weighted accordingly. Okay. There are 3 lab practicals, each worth 6%. The first lab practical is the day after your lecture exam 1. It seems like two big assessments right back to back would be crazy, but the content overlaps significantly. So studying for the lecture is helping you to study for the lab and vice versa. Okay. Finally, there are a series of lab activities. You'll be doing simulations through Mastering A&P. You will be learning models and labeling or kind of making like flashcards. So lots of different things. Again, bigger assignments are going to be weighted a little bit more heavily. Okay. Again, any questions? Hopefully that's good news. Oops. Okay. Lab practicals. I just want to make a couple brief notes about the practicals. First of all, for lab practicals, I am going to give you guys photographs of models that we're going to learn together in the lab. And there'll be an arrow and it's going to point to, this structure right here. And I'll say, what is this structure? And you will literally type in what that structure is. Now, spelling counts. And I know that might be intimidating because in most classes, spelling just does not count. But anatomy really is learning a new language, and it is a very specific, loaded kind of language. And so even minor spelling differences might completely change the nature of what you're talking about. And in a field where you are saving lives, where you are talking about specific issues and specific symptoms, you need to be incredibly clear and efficient in what you're saying and what you're communicating to your colleagues. So just a couple examples of how just a teeny little spelling change completely changes the conversation. Ilium and ilium, for example. One letter difference, one is I, one is E. One means the hip bone, the other means the small intestine. Right? So if you are writing notes to another physician that is assisting you with something, you might be talking past each other. Right? Vesicle and vesicle, one is a small blister, the other has something to do with the urinary bladder. Right? So very, very different structures. And perhaps the most startling maybe, peroneal, right, with an O as opposed to per-I or I-neal. One is the side of your leg, the other is the pelvic floor, right? So if you mix these up, it can be very concerning, right? So for the lecture, you are not going to have to write stuff out. Everything is multiple choice, so there is no spelling component of the lecture. But for the lab practical, you will be graded for the correct spelling. And so when you are writing out the structures with your little plastic sheet protector, make sure that when you check your answers, you're not just checking for the right term, you're also checking for the right spelling. And I can say that this is what trips most students up, if anything. So if you are not a good speller, I encourage you to start as soon as possible to learn the spellings. Okay. One more note about lab practicals, and that is up here. So a little bit later within the syllabus. For the lab practicals, I give you a picture of a model that you've seen before and ask you to give me a term that I gave you literally just a couple days before that. So I think that this format really lends itself to cheating, unfortunately. And not that I expect this to be a problem at all, but just to be fair to all, we are going to take lab practicals together on Zoom. Okay. So what that means is that on the day of the practical, you are going to join a Zoom call just like you did this morning. You are going to have your camera on so I can see you, I can see your immediate area, and your microphone off. Once you are on Zoom, I am going to give you a password so that you can open up a test, the practical exam itself, on Blackboard. And so we are going to sit together on Zoom, and I can be with you to monitor your environment, but also I am there to answer any questions you have. Right? So if my label of this structure isn't clear, you can be like, for question number 4, are you asking about this? Or are you asking about this down here? So I am there to answer your questions, and we're all going to be together. Again, muted so that there is no distraction for anybody else taking the test. Okay. The alternative to this is using Respondus Lockdown browser. In the past more than year at this point, there hasn't been a single class that preferred to use Respondus over the whole Zoom situation. If you guys are different, if you have a strong opinion, you'd rather use Respondus, okay, that's fine. Just let me know and I can modify that. But again, I've set up the Zoom lab practical situation because of the disdain towards Respondus. Okay, so if you have another perspective, another opinion, shoot me an email or a chat or something. Moving through the syllabus, as I've said a couple times now, this class moves really quickly, right? It goes quickly even during a 16-week semester. And of course, we are only together for 6 weeks. And so with that in mind, I have asked previous students how they were able to succeed, right? So how exactly that they would advise you to approach this class so that you know right from the beginning, these are student quotes from previous semesters. And in summary, almost everyone says, first of all, start right away, right? Don't cram at the end. Of course, in a 6-week class, there's really no time to get behind. So you really have to dedicate a lot of time every single day. Don't wait until the night before to start studying. Also, making flashcards and study materials. Note that I don't give study guides. In graduate school, you're not getting study guides. In the workforce, you're not getting study guides. And so one of the goals of this class is to teach you not only a bit about the human body, but also how to learn about the human body. And so I will help you as we go along to figure out what types of study materials might be really helpful for you. And we're also going to work on some study materials together, asynchronously, in fact, but you're going to be making resources together, not from me, but from you guys. And previous students have said that this really helps, and hopefully the fact that we're working on these resources together will take a little bit of load off of you individually. Okay. And of course, lots of colors, right? Very, very colorful. All right, a little bit more about reviewing for exams. I have factored into our schedule a little bit of Zoom time before any major assessment. And so during the Zoom time, we will use the annotate feature and answer some questions and label some diagrams together on the screen. But also this is your opportunity for asking me questions. I am more than happy to help you out. I am here for you. I know that I set the bar high. But I have full confidence that you guys can meet and maybe even exceed my expectations for you guys. Again, I am here for you to support you through the entire process. I usually get here, a little bit before 11:30 on Mondays and Wednesdays. So you can ask me questions then. You can stay after class. You can shoot me an email, whatever works for you. Okay. Moving down to student responsibility. Of course, I would love if I could just dump all of this crazy content into your heads and you would just know it and be able to use it. But unfortunately, that's not how our brains work. In college, I took a few education classes, and the take-home message that I had from all of those courses was the one who does the work does the learning. And so, yes, it is a lot of work. It is not work that I can do for you. I give you lots of different resources and happy to review with you and everything. But at the end of the day, you are the ones that are responsible for this learning, and you're the only ones that can actually make yourself learn. Okay. In order to learn, I definitely recommend taking notes. Yes, this is an online course. Yes, you can go back and look at the PowerPoint notes. You can look at the videos that I've posted before, but just having these things isn't actually helping it sink in, right? So you actually have to physically engage with the content, taking notes, typing them out or writing them out, drawing them out, whatever. The more ways that you interact with this content, the better off you will learn it. Okay. And of course, this takes a lot of time. The general rule of thumb is that you should expect to study for 3 hours outside of class for every hour of lecture. If you do the math, you'll see that this is could very well become your life for the next few weeks. This course is scheduled to take up about 14 hours of class time every week, and then 3 hours per hour on top of that. So of course, it's not recommended that you have multiple courses that you're taking or that you have a full-time job, but I have seen students nail it in the past, right? So if you need help, advice, whatever, I'm here for you, but you should expect to study a lot outside of the times we meet together. Okay, a couple more policies here. We are going to start off the term without Respondus, without working on Zoom for any of our lecture exams. For the most part, the lecture exams, again, are multiple choice. They are selecting from a drop-down menu, so it might seem, super easy, but in fact, I expect you guys to take the content that you learned from me and apply it to other situations. And so, just being able to Google these answers is a little bit more difficult. So for that reason, we're going to start by not using, any of Respondus or anything, although I do reserve the right to use Respondus if I suspect academic dishonesty. Again, not expecting that will be an issue, but I just want to throw it out there. Okay. Although all of the resources for the class are online, I request that you guys don't post them anywhere else, right? Like, yes, my videos are going to be on YouTube. Of course, we're in Zoom here together, but please don't post anything for the world to see, right? Other peers, that's one thing, but not for the world to see unless you have prior permission. Okay. And finally, attendance. I understand that you guys have life stuff going on. You can miss three classes without any kind of penalty, but for every 2 after that, you start to lose points off your final grade. And of course, if you're missing like 5 classes, that is 2.5 weeks out of a 6-week course, right? So I'm sure that won't be an issue. Our schedule, now, as you can see, I love the colors, and I try to make this course really straightforward and color-coded so that it's really easy for you guys to know what is going on and when. I gave you guys this legend here, so pretty much anything that is, it looked orange on my end, now it looks a little yellow, but orangey yellow, that means we are meeting together. We need to talk on Zoom at 11:30. And so if we look at the first part of our schedule down here, we see that Mondays always meet at 11:30, Wednesdays always meet at 11:30 on Zoom, right? So those cells down here are yellowy orange. Okay. On the other hand, we have lots of asynchronous lessons, right? So I post something and you do it on your own time. So again, all Tuesdays and Thursdays are green, right? We're not meeting together on Zoom on those days. There are some Mondays and Wednesdays, in fact, most of them really, where we have a synchronous meeting first, and then I dismiss you guys to complete some kind of asynchronous lab or other activity after that. Okay, so you might expect that this might take, an hour and a half or so, and then the lab might take another hour or 2 after that. So again, block out this time, make sure that you can complete these assignments on your own time that day. Don't, work a double on a Monday or a Wednesday, right? There's just not enough time. Some days, right, like this one here, we are going to meet for a longer period of time. So this particular lab, we are going to work on in breakout groups. Okay, so you should be able to look at the next 6 weeks and see when you should allot for a lot of Zoom time. All the others, make sure that you have enough time to complete the assignments of the day. Okay. There are also, you know, different things that are going to be due. So again, today, your job after class is over is to log into Mastering A&P, get used to that, maybe even start working on homework number 1. Tomorrow, we aren't going to meet, but I have content posted for you, and you should be able to complete a Kahoot by the end of the day. And I'll show this to you in just a moment. Okay. Assignment due the end of the day, assignment due at the end of the day. So you should get used to this format. It is what is going to be the case for the rest of the term. Now also note that I have weekend in here, right? So this isn't ever going to be learning new content. It is really just working on the same content that we have completed throughout the rest of the week. For the most part, these assignments or assessments open up on Thursday. Okay, so you don't have to do this over the weekend. If you want Friday through Sunday completely off, you don't want to think about A&P, I can't imagine. But if you want all 3 of those weekend days off, you can absolutely get this stuff done during the typical week. Okay, I encourage you guys to work ahead anytime possible. Right, so today's class is certainly not going to be all the way until 4:30, but you've already allotted this time for A&P. So maybe you want to get through the first portion of tomorrow's lesson, or maybe you want to get through the whole thing and get that Kahoot done and in early. Okay, so as of now, all of the content for the first week is posted. So you can get a jump start on any of this you want. Questions? Okay. Fast forwarding through this just a little bit, note that we don't have class on Memorial Day, and after Memorial Day, we have a lecture exam and a lab practical. Okay. As always, I allot a little bit of lecture time, so Zoom time, to reviewing for these things. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at Blackboard. I know I've thrown a lot of different things at you guys so far. I want to make sure you know where to find it. Gosh. Sorry. All of the things are just in the way. Okay, so when you first open up Blackboard, this is what you are going to see. I'm assuming that you have taken a look already. So syllabus and schedule, which I sent to you already. We are going to use a single Zoom link for our class, lecture, lab practical, whatever. This is the one we're using. And here is a little bit more information about Mastering A&P. All of the content, the links, the notes, anything that you're going to need to learn the material is under course resources. For the most part, the course is broken into 4 units, which with each of or with a lecture exam for each unit. So exam 1 content, this is all of the exam 1 stuff. Okay, here is the relevant portion of the schedule for you. So it's all color coded. It's all right here for you as soon as you open up Blackboard. Note the yellowy orange, right, of synchronous sessions is reflected in the titles of every single entry within this exam 1 content folder, right? So if we're meeting together on Zoom, the title will be orange. If we are not meeting together on Zoom, but there's still something going on that day, it's going to be green, just like the green up here, right? So again, color really helps us to learn, and hopefully it will help you to recognize what you should expect on that day. Okay. Now, on a particular day, right? Today is Monday, so I'm going to go to Monday's entry, and everything I need for the day, all of the agenda items, this is what we're going to do. This is the link that I need. These are things, that are due. Everything that you need is right here in this single entry. Okay? And that is going to be the case throughout the entire semester. You don't have to click on a million different things. Go to what today's entry is, and it will take you to the appropriate spot. And also, these are attachments. So the notes that I'm going to go over eventually, we're getting there, lots of logistics today, are right here. And here are some blank body diagrams, which we will get into shortly as well. And now tomorrow, Note, it's asynchronous. We're not meeting on Zoom. It's green. Here are the notes. Here is a playlist. So essentially, you are going to go to that link. There are going to be 2 different videos. Both of these are, videos that I have made. It is just me talking at you just like I am right now. You will watch it while you are taking notes, right? In theory, hopefully a lot of it is review. If not, no big deal. So watching this, taking notes, and then once you feel pretty good about your understanding, you are going to go to Kahoot, right? So if you have the app on your phone, you can type in this game pin. If not, you can just go to the link, right? And so this is not graded for accuracy. It is not, no big deal if you get things wrong. It's just hopefully showing you what types of questions you might get on a quiz, and also showing me areas that I need to review the following day on Wednesday. So this is completed asynchronously, so you're all going to be playing this, but not at the same time. And so you'll be able to see where you stack up next to your classmates, just like a normal Kahoot, but not at the same time, right? So kind of a cool thing at this point. Whatever nickname you type in, please make sure I can connect it back to you, right? Like I don't want some, woof woof or something, some random nickname. I need to be able to connect it back to you so that I can actually give you credit. Okay. So that is tomorrow. Okay. Wednesday, right? We are going to have a Zoom lesson on these things. Here are the notes, right? And after a certain point, you're going to complete the remainder of what's going on Wednesday on your own, right? You watch this thing, you read these instructions up here, you make a couple slides / flashcards at this link right here. If you need more help, here is a verbal explanation for it. All right, so this is exactly how it's going to be. This is the entire week's worth of content. So if you have an extra hour tonight or tomorrow night or something, you can get a little bit ahead. Okay? And of course, over the weekend, work on mastering A&P homework, even though it's not due right away. And also complete your first quiz. You should be able to complete the first 3 homework assignments before taking your quiz. This will help you to learn the content and better prepare for the quiz that's due before we see each other again on Monday. Now, the only things that aren't going to be in these exam 1 content folders are the assessment. Okay, so you guys can't see this yet. You'll be able to see it on Thursday morning. But essentially, this is your first quiz. There are going to be 21 questions for a total of 25 points, meaning that some questions have multiple points. Right? So you'll be selecting multiple things from drop-down menus. Couple points of extra credit. I like to add several questions on every assessment for extra credit. Essentially, the idea here is that maybe you might not know this bit of information, but you know this bit of information, and that is still valuable, and so you should be awarded points accordingly. Okay. Quizzes, you are allowed to and encouraged to use your notes. Right? So of the 4 quizzes, please, or you can use your notes, you don't have to. Keep in mind, however, that these assessments, all of them are timed. And there is physically not enough time to look up every single answer. Also, some answers you just can't look up, right? You need to know this body of information and apply it to another image or another kind of clinical situation. So I encourage you to study as if you were sitting in a classroom with me without your notes, without anything but what is in your head. And to organize your notes, to consolidate them, right? Don't just have my huge clunky PowerPoints that you can pull up on your computer. No, you should synthesize them. You should make charts of all the chemical structures. You should make a list of organelles and what these, what each one does, so that if you get a question on a chemical structure or an organelle, you can go right to that paper and look through all of the content at once. Questions? All right. All right, and then of course, your grades. These are the 3 assignments that you guys have this week. And you can see their classification. So you can always go back to the grades, right? Know exactly how much those are going to be worth. Any questions about Blackboard, about where to find stuff? Any logistics? Okay, hopefully no news is good news. Okay, so that's where we find everything. For the lab, right, you do not have to buy anything physical. In this summer session, there isn't going to be any kind of dissection. There's not going to be, you guys having to buy, models or anything like that. So no physical materials. We're only going to be doing some lab simulations. Okay, so on the computer only. For the most part, the labs are asynchronous, right? So asynchronous lab on tissues is what we're doing this week. Asynchronous lab on membrane transport. We're going to work together in this one, but again, most of them are asynchronous. We're going to be working with mastering A&P. I am going to give you guys videos in which I take a model and I point to the different structures and I say, this is this and this is that. And you are going to look at photographs of those same models and you're going to label them and you're going to learn the models in that way. This particular type of lab is very applicable to the lab practicals, right? So you're going to get a leg muscle model and you're going to learn all the different muscles. And then I'm going to give you pictures of those same exact models and you're going to say, this is the rectus femoris. Okay. So those are different types of labs you might expect to work on your own. Also, beginning with this Wednesday, you're going to make study resources, so like flashcards, etc., with your classmates. So this is not completed for the most part in breakout groups. You are just going to make a couple resources on your own, and we're going to pool all those resources together so that you have a full set of flashcards or whatever. Okay. A few of these labs are going to be synchronous, and so we're going to practice with that a little bit today. Okay, so we're going to break out into breakout rooms and work on a simulation and answer some questions, graph some data, whatever, using a shared document. So this is what we're going to be doing today. Okay, so we are going to get used to the breakout groups thing. We are going to get used to sharing documents and labeling things together with a shared file. So in just a moment here, I am going to paste a link to this particular document in the chat, right? So the Zoom chat, okay? You guys should click on the link so that you can, access this link or this file here. And I'm going to randomly place you guys into breakout rooms. Essentially, a little window is going to pop up and it'll say, join room, whatever. You click on the join button and you're going to be taken into a breakout room. And now once you're in there, you're going to be working with 3 or 4 of your peers to make or to label this document. So what you're first going to do is choose one person in your group to make a copy of this document, and you're going to work on the copy. Okay, so what does that look like? Excuse me. So you make a copy of the entire presentation. Okay. Once you have made the copy, you're going to want to share it with the other people in your breakout room, as well as with me. Make sure, there's a couple different ways that you can do this. You can, of course, type in everyone's email addresses. In fact, I hope that you type in my email address and just share it with me like that. Or you can change who can access it, right? So anyone with a link, right? Make sure that they can edit it because you're all going to be working on this together, and then copy the link and paste it into the chat on Zoom. Either way works, right? Just make sure that everybody can edit it. Okay, so now what are we doing? Your group collectively, once everyone can access your copy of this document, you're going to type in your names, okay? And you are going to label this blank body diagram with all the terms I give you. And now I do not at all expect you to know where all of these things are, but what I want you to do is use the clues that are in these anatomical terms to guess where these structures are. Okay, so as you can see that I'm doing here, essentially you're going to copy those terms, you're going to paste them up on the slide, and you are going to insert some kind of line, right? A scribble, a polyline, a regular old line, and you're going to indicate on this diagram where you think these structures are. Okay? This is a process that we're going to be doing a lot. Okay, so working on these files together, you got to copy it, you got to share it, you got to make sure that everybody can edit it. You have to be able to label the structures that we're going to be learning. Okay, so that is what we're doing today. Other thing that maybe you picked up on here, changing the color and the thickness of the line is really, really helpful. Here, you know, red versus green, this is the default that Google gives you, which is really not very helpful, especially if you have a lot of different lines. Okay, so any questions about that? Okay. So let us begin talking about A&P. So this class is called Anatomy and Physiology. The focus of this class is, of course, to learn about the human body, but not simply to take a look at the heart and talk about the 4 different chambers and that type of thing, but instead to really examine the human body from the microscopic level on up. And of course, given who I am, maybe even expand that out a little bit beyond the body as well. So this image here, I think is really interesting because it shows us just how the DNA can lead to certain cells, right? Cells, of course, come together to produce tissues and organs in the entire body. The body itself is made up of a series of organ systems, and we'll be talking about that here in just a moment. But essentially, in order to understand the symptoms you feel, in order to understand yourself as the owner of a human body, right? And of course, wanting to interact with human bodies as a professional, we need to start kind of from the ground up. And surely this course is required in a lot of your programs, and so that might be why you are here, but I encourage you to think a little bit more deeply than that. Again, you are the proud owner of a human body, and so maybe by the end of this class, your friends and family members will be coming to you and asking you all sorts of questions about the symptoms they feel, and you'll be able to understand what is going on within yourself as well. And so many times, you know, I personally, and you know, students in my classes have been able to kind of fix a problem, become healthier just because of their deep understanding of the human body. So even if your career goals completely change, you will still benefit from understanding the body at all of these different levels. Helping yourself, helping your family members when you know they come to you, being able to ask the correct or the right questions when you go to the doctor, right, for different types of treatments and different you know, diagnoses. Okay, so that is why we study this class, of course. Why do we study both of these fields together? Well, again, this is anatomy and physiology. And if you've taken a look at the course catalog at Stockton, you might have been overwhelmed by just how many different anatomy or physiology or anatomy and physiology for nurses, for health sciences, for all these different things. So why do we study both of these things together as opposed to just anatomy and just physiology? Well, anatomy itself is really the study of structures. Okay, so here we can see the structure of the heart. That is an A&P2 concept. So we can say this is the right atrium, this is the right ventricle, here are some of the major blood vessels, right? So actually naming the structures so that when we do have a conversation with our doctors about what we're experiencing, when we have a conversation with our colleagues about treating patients, we know exactly what we're talking about. We don't have to say that open thing that's kind of on the top on the right, right? We really can be specific and therefore efficient about treating our patients, which in many circumstances is a life or death circumstance. Okay. Anatomy itself isn't just looking at the macro scale, it is also looking at the microscopic scale. Now, physiology isn't the study of the structures themselves, but instead how these structures work. So when we talk about physiology, we can look at a variety of the different things that are going on in the heart as it is beating. This is an ECG or EKG, which might look a little bit familiar to you. So this is actually showing us the electrical activity, electrical waves passing through the different cells of the heart. We can also look at the pressures in the atria. We can look at the pressures of the blood in the ventricle. We can look at the blood pressure in the aorta. And we can see that there's a lot of variability over one cardiac cycle in these different pressures and volumes. And so in order to understand the physiology, right, why do we see these huge shifts in pressure and these huge shifts in electrical activity? We need to, of course, be able to talk about what those structures are doing. Why are they shaped that way? How does that shape actually give rise to this type of physiology? Right? And so anatomy and physiology are therefore codependent. They complement each other, the form, the anatomy, and the function. Right? So in order to study one, it is really important to have a good understanding of the other as well. And so one of the key themes that will come up again and again throughout A&P1, A&P2, and of course into your medical career is this complementarity. The structure matches the function, right? A different shape of chambers, a different pattern of blood flow would completely change the function of the heart. Okay, so complementarity of form and function, the structure matches the function. Anytime you are introduced to a new structure or a new piece of physiology or the physiological story, you should think about how the structure matches the function. Okay. Again, this is kind of where we want to be. We're interested in studying the heart and the lungs and the muscles, so these larger organs. But in order to understand how blood flows to the heart, how these electrical waves give rise to blood pressure and therefore delivery to all of the tissues in the body, we need to zoom in and first, of course, study this microscopic level. Right? It really is activities occurring at these individual cells themselves that allows our entire body to have blood delivered and therefore for us to live. And so we are going to be zooming in on the microscopic level and building on that ultimately to the gross or macroscopic anatomical level. Okay, both are anatomy. Okay, so all life, including the human body, has these multiple nested, what are called levels of organization, right? So at the smallest level, and where we're actually going to start beginning tomorrow, is the chemical level. Okay, so here we have atoms, the smallest, the smallest units here, combined to form molecules given ionic bonds, covalent bonds, hydrogen bonds, etc. So atoms come together to form molecules. None of these are actually considered to be alive. Yes, they make up our body. Yes, we are a certain percentage of carbon and hydrogen and oxygen, but those individual components aren't themselves alive. Okay, now when these molecules come together and are organized in such a way that forms a cell, the cell itself is considered to be alive. And the reason for that is that cells can make more of themselves. Okay, so they can replicate, they can make an exact copy of themselves or even divide into smaller versions with half the DNA as the original. They can metabolize, so they can take in components of the outside world into the cell, do some chemical magic, and ultimately fuel their growth, fuel their activities and specific functions, and so on and so forth. So cells are the smallest unit of life that exists. And again, cells are made up of individual molecules, which are made up of individual atoms. Now, the study of cells, so ology, study of, is cytology. And so as I showed you guys earlier with my fancy little chart here, which again, I encourage you guys to make given what you find in the book. Cyto or cyte, this means cells. So cytology is literally the study of cells. We are going to be introduced to lots of different cells that have the word cyte in it. Okay. Now, cells in a human body don't really function independently of one another. Cells generally come together with similar cells and different cells to form what is called a tissue. Okay, so the tissue consists of similar cells that come together to complete a common goal. In this example, this smooth muscle tissue, these cells are contractile. That is, they can contract. They start out long and they get a little bit shorter. And when a lot of these cells get shorter altogether, essentially what that does is it, well, in this example here, it reduces the diameter of this blood vessel. So here is a smooth muscle layer. And so when they're relaxed, the tube is nice and open. And when they all get shorter all at the same time, the diameter gets smaller. So this affects blood pressure and blood delivery throughout the body. Okay. The study of tissues, which you're going to get into a lot more starting on Wednesday, is called histology. Again, ology, the study of histo, tissues, the study of tissues. Okay. Now again, tissues don't function independently. For the most part, tissues join together with other tissues to form what is called an organ. So organs are made up of multiple types of tissue. You might not think about it, but an artery or a vein is technically an organ, and it is an organ because it has a layer of smooth muscle. It has a layer of another type of tissue called epithelium or epithelial tissue, and at least one more layer called connective tissue. Okay, so all of these tissues work together towards the common goal. In this case, that common goal is to contain the blood. Right, so make sure that it is within a closed loop. It's not just flowing anywhere throughout the body. We want our blood to be delivered via our vessels to an organ and then back to the heart to ultimately be reoxygenated. Again, organs don't function independently. There's so much interconnectivity here. Organs work together as organ systems. Right, so an organ system is multiple organs coming together towards a common goal. In this example here, we are looking at the cardiovascular system, also known as the circulatory system. In this organ system, we have the heart, and we have blood vessels, arteries, veins, capillaries, etc., all working together to deliver nutrient-rich, oxygen-rich blood to the tissues, and then return that blood back to the heart and ultimately the lungs to be kind of resupplied. Okay. One more level of organization that we focus on in this class, and that is the organism. Okay, so multiple organ systems come together for the good of the entire organism. Okay, so the cardiovascular system doesn't function independently from the respiratory system or the urinary system, etc. Okay, so the organism is all of these organ systems working together. Okay. In anatomy and physiology, 1 and then AP2, we study all of the organ systems of the body. I am going to briefly walk you through each of these organ systems. Okay. We focus on the first few, and then the next you're going to learn more about in AP2. Okay. The first organ system that we are going to start learning about actually this Thursday already is the integumentary system. The integument is the skin, and it happens to be the largest organ of the entire body. Okay, it covers everything else. It protects the body and the underlying tissues and organ systems, and essentially creates a very selective barrier between what is inside, what is our body, versus what is in the outside world. And so the skin, of course, functions in keeping bad stuff out, so keeping bacteria and viruses and other types of pathogens out, chemicals out, It functions in kind of insulating the underlying tissues. Okay, so insulating from changes in temperature, insulating from kind of abrasion and physical damage. Okay. This skin functions in making vitamin D, which is actually critically important in maintaining our calcium levels in our body, and of course, maintaining strong bones, etc. And the skin is very important in essentially informing our brain, right, our central control center, about what is going on in the outside world, what is going on in our body, so that our brain can make changes accordingly. Okay, so we can use what are called receptors to inform our brain. We can regulate temperature with sweat glands and so on and so forth. So very complex and important organ system. The skeletal system, this organ system consists of all 206-ish bones of the body, and we'll talk about that later as well. But as you might imagine, the skeleton is really important in allowing us to stand up against gravity and actually move our body in space. Okay, so very important in mobility, but also important in protecting a lot of our internal organs like our heart and our lungs. Okay. Also, the bones serve as the largest reservoir of certain ions, right, or electrolytes in our body. So these minerals are important in nerve signaling. They're important in balancing the fluid in our body. So very important in maintaining us as an organism. And if we have too much of a particular mineral, we can store it in the bones. If we don't have enough, we can break the bones down and utilize it for our more immediate bodily functions. Finally, the bones are actually where our blood cells are made, right? Particularly our red blood cells, but there is also white blood cells being created in our bones as well. Lots of functions of the skeletal system. Skeletal muscles. These muscles are for the most part attached to the bones, and they are going to facilitate this movement, right? Of course, they can move bones relative to one another and therefore move our bodies in space. But even more than that, they are important in communication. Okay, so making facial expressions. Right? Lots of human communication occurs just with expression alone. Verbal communication, right? Of course, all of the verbal activity that is occurring is dependent upon your skeletal muscles. Okay? And finally, the skeletal muscle system helps us to maintain our body temperature, right? So we always want a 98.6-ish. And so we can contract our muscles really quickly, therefore shiver to produce heat if our body is too cold, etc. And just to throw it out there, we are going into all of these different organ systems in more detail in this class and the next. For this particular part of the course, where I want you guys to be, so the level of understanding I want you guys to have, is the basics about what each of these organ systems are doing. Okay, so what is the main functions, which of course I'm going over now. Okay. The last organ system that we are going to cover in detail in A&P 1 is the nervous system. Okay. The nervous system is the fast-acting control system of the body. And I emphasize fast-acting because this organ system can control every single tissue, every single organ in our body with electricity, which of course moves lightning fast to send a message to the rest of the body. Now, the caveat of this really quick control system is that the messages generated by the nervous system are quick to arrive, but also quick to be broken down. So if we want to keep controlling an organ far away, we have to keep on sending electrical signal after signal. Okay? On the other hand, we have another central control organ system. This one is kind of the opposite / complement to the nervous system, and that is called the endocrine system. Okay, so the endocrine system is different than the nervous system in that it is not releasing electrical signals. It's actually releasing chemicals called hormones into the blood. And the blood is going to distribute these signaling molecules all throughout the body. Once a signaling molecule is delivered to, whatever target organ we need, then those cells are going to change in response to that hormone. Okay. So unlike the nervous system, endocrine system uses the blood as opposed to nerve cells called neurons. The endocrine system uses hormones released in the blood. Okay. And it takes a little bit of time in order to get those hormones to their target tissues. But once they're there, they can produce a relatively long-term response. Okay? So good example of kind of the difference between these two. We've all actually experienced before, I'm certain. So you're driving down the road, someone cuts you off, right? Or you're trying to find a parking place at Stockton, right? Someone cuts in front of you. Immediately, of course, you slam on the brakes and you save your life and your car, etc. That quick acting response is your nervous system, right? It happens right away. In fact, it's reflexive, and the message is being sent to the target tissues within a fraction of a second. Electricity. On the other hand, the wave of warmth and your toes get kind of tingly and you might start to sweat and your heart is racing. All of that stuff, all of those responses are going to start a couple seconds later, right? So after 1 or 2 seconds, all of a sudden you get that feeling, that adrenaline, in fact, feeling, because, oh my gosh, you almost just got in an accident, you almost just died. That is the endocrine system. And so your heart is going to be racing a little bit longer than your foot is on the brake, right? Oops. I can't see my chat all of a sudden. I'm sorry, guys. Yeah, I really just can't see the chat. Interesting. Oh, there it is. Sorry about that. Oh my gosh. Yeah, absolutely. So having the numb legs, having that like weird feeling of adrenaline, that is your endocrine system, right? As opposed to your nervous system, which like gets you out of trouble in the moment. But then as soon as the moment has passed, those signals stop. Yeah, call it. Okay, so again, in A&P1, we are covering these systems in detail. And here's the cutoff, right? So the endocrine system and beyond, all of those are A&P2 organ systems. Okay, so I'm going to introduce you briefly to the rest of the organ systems. Cardiovascular system, as you might imagine, is responsible for pumping blood. Why do we need blood? Why is that so important? Why is bleeding out the game over for us? Well, the blood delivers oxygen and nutrients to all of the tissues of your body. It delivers those hormones so that you get that adrenaline wave when you are almost in an accident or in an accident. And so all of those signals, all of those resources that our cells need are delivered by our cardiovascular system. And so it pumps all the good stuff. It gets rid of all the wastes. Right? Our body makes a lot of waste. Not even just talking about feces and urine, talking about metabolic waste products. So the carbon dioxide we exhale, right? That is being produced by all of our cells all the time. And so we need to get that out of our body or else it'll really change our pH and it'll really wreak havoc on everything. So we need to take that carbon dioxide from our tissues and actually allow us to exhale it. And so our cardiovascular system is the one that does that. So really it is responsible for connecting all of the tissues of our body and keeping them fed. Okay. Probably the organ system that is least understood by normal students coming into this class, but maybe the most interesting in light of all the things that have happened over the last more than a year, is the lymphatic system and immune system. The lymphatic system is generally portrayed as green as opposed to red and blue for blood, oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. This circulatory system, instead of just kind of going around in a circle, instead the lymphatic system is blind-ended. Essentially, there are little vessels in your feet and your fingers and around your eyes, everywhere, and essentially these vessels are going to suck up anything that's just kind of like chilling in your tissues, right? So any extra fluid, any broken down proteins, any dead cells, any viruses and bacteria that have made their way into your body. And so on the way through this circulatory system, all of that stuff, the fluid filled with pathogens, filled with broken down stuff, is going to be passed through these little dots, which are called lymph nodes. And in the lymph nodes, this is where a lot of the cells involved in our immune system are located. And so essentially, if a virus or a bacteria or a spike protein from a virus is passed through one of these lymph nodes, essentially what's happening in there is like show and tell, right? They look at the spike protein and they're like, oh my gosh, that does not look human. That does not look like us. We need to attack the heck out of that thing. And essentially in the lymph nodes, that is where all of these T cells and B cells and other immune cells are going to replicate and go all over your body to look for that particular spike protein. Okay, so the fluid, the proteins, the pathogens are passed through lymph node after lymph node after lymph node, informing our immune system of what is breaking into our body, what we need to launch an attack against. And ultimately, after this fluid has been filtered tons of times, it is going to be returned into our blood circulatory system. So it's actually dumped back into our circulation around here. And then our heart pumps the rest of it kind of as blood. Okay. There are other functions of the lymphatic system. For example, our spleen is responsible for housing and making a lot of these immune cells, but also for filtering out used red blood cells that kind of break down and get funky over time. Okay. So that is an AMP2 topic, absolutely fascinating, so very relevant to life right now and always relevant to life, but to be continued. The respiratory system. Of course, the respiratory system is critically important in getting oxygen into our body and therefore our tissues and for getting rid of carbon dioxide, but there is really so much more to it than that. One highlight that I will leave you with the respiratory system is that it regulates our pH. As you're going to learn tomorrow in lecture, our pH needs to be about 7.4. If we get too high or too low because we're exercising too much or we're not breathing enough, or we have poorly managed diabetes, and so we're building up all of these extra ketones, right? Like keto diet, right? So if we build up all this extra acid, our respiratory system can actually fix that problem. So respiratory gas balance as well as pH balance. Next, digestive system. The digestive system is essentially a continuous tube that is highly modified, again, continuous from mouth all the way to anus. At different points along this tube, we are going to take big clunky biomolecules, right? Your candy bar molecules, your hamburger molecules. We're going to break them down into their smaller subunits called monomers. And in your small intestine down here, we are going to take those molecules from inside this tube and pull them into our blood. And of course, our cardiovascular system is then going to circulate those nutrients all throughout our body so that we can use those building blocks to build human molecules. Right, so we take in cow molecules, right, a hamburger, and through this entire complex tube, we break the cow molecules into tiny pieces and then use those tiny pieces to build up into human tissue. Okay. Anything that we don't need or we don't have time to absorb into our blood is released as as feces. Okay. The urinary system, completely different than the digestive system, and I see these two get confused all the time, but digestive system is taking big molecules, making them small, and eliminating feces that's left over. The urinary system, in this system, the kidneys are responsible for filtering the blood. Okay, so we need to make sure that we have just the right amount of calcium, just the right amount of, these different hormones. We have just the right amount of blood pressure, in fact. And so the kidneys are really important in maintaining the blood. Essentially, anything that is filtered out of the blood, right? Any, extra acid, any drugs, any extra hormones, extra anything is eliminated from the body as urine. Right. The urinary system is also critically important in our acid-base pH balance. And finally, the reproductive system. Of course, the primary function of the reproductive system is to make gametes, right? So make sperm, make egg, and ultimately, in terms of the female, to sustain a developing embryo through fetus. Okay. But there's a little bit more to it than that. So both male and female reproductive systems have the ability to make gametes as well as make hormones. And so these hormones are important in changing behavior and development, right? So developing breasts versus a beard, okay? All connected back to hormones. And so male and female characteristics are determined by the development of the ovaries and the testes. And so those are all of the organ systems by the end of A&P2, whether you're taking it this summer or in the fall or whenever. We're covering all of these. In A&P1, in this class with me, I am going to be teaching you those first 4 organ systems, not broken down by system, but instead broken down by region. And again, this all ties back to the connectivity between all these organ systems, right? We're not going to be studying all of the skeletal muscles in isolation. Here they are. Here's a big list of hundreds of words. And then the next week, here's a big list of 100 bone words, right? That's not how we're going to approach the body. Instead, we are going to look at the arm, for example. And so we are going to learn about the bones, and then we're going to add in the muscles, and then we're going to add in the nerves. And so what we can do here is we can see how spatially these structures relate to one another, right? Where's the bone versus the muscle versus the nerve? We can see how they work together for the function of the entire region, the entire arm. But also, I personally think it's a lot easier to learn it that way. In that, when we are studying the arm, right, the bone has a name, right? The muscle name uses the bone name as part of it. And the nerve is named according to what bone is right next to it. And so instead of learning hundreds of terms seemingly randomly, instead we're going to learn bunches of terms that are all very much related to one another. Okay, so this is regional anatomy, particularly when we get into the arms and the legs. The very last unit of the class, we're going to look at the whole head, right? So the brain and the skull and the muscles, right? All of those things all together. Questions? And again, the human body is not a series of independently working tissues or organs or organ systems. They are all working together. A problem with one is going to be experienced and affect another organ system. This image here is from your textbook. I think it does a great job of simplifying the entire body into a very abstract picture of the interconnectivity between the organ systems. Briefly, this line out here is showing us the separation of inside the body versus outside the body. So that's our skin or our integument, right? So that's what's up here. we can see that we take food into our digestive system. Food is processed all the way along this continuous tube. Right? So as long as something is in the tube, it's not really inside the body yet. Whenever we want, right, all the good stuff, all the sugar, all the amino acids, the protein pieces, all of these good things, these nutrients, we then take over the digestive system lining and we dump it into the blood. Okay? Anything we don't want goes out the wash. Okay? We also take air, right, oxygen, into our body via the respiratory system. The oxygen is then loaded onto hemoglobin within our blood cells, and again, distributed around the entire body by our heart, right, within our blood vessels. Of course, metabolic byproducts are released in the same way. Again, stuff that is in this space here is not technically in the body, right? It's not in this space. This is continuous with the outside world. Okay. The heart and blood vessels are going to distribute the blood to all of the tissues of our body. So our bones, our muscles, our liver, right? All of these different organs are going to take all the good stuff and deposit any metabolic waste products. Now, a lot of this waste the waste is then filtered out of the blood via the excretory system, also called the urinary system, here. Right? So anything that we don't want in the blood is going to go out the kidney, and ultimately out the urethra as urine. Okay, so again, everything is connected. Specifically, it is connected by the cardiovascular system. So once something, right, bacteria, virus, whatever, gets into your blood, it is then distributed throughout the entire body. Okay. All of these systems are working together ultimately to maintain consistent internal conditions. Okay, so we need to have an ideal pH, we need to have an ideal temperature, we need to have just the right amount of calcium, etc. And so this concept is called homeostasis. Okay? And so all of our organ systems are talking back and forth with one another via the nervous system, via hormones, to provide feedback about what is going on elsewhere. All right, so the heart is obviously in a very different place than your kidneys, but both of them are working together to maintain the entire organism. So they have to talk to each other with what is called feedback. Okay. And so I have this video, which was giving me a little trouble earlier. Yep, still giving me trouble. So 1 second. Okay. So this short clip is going to talk a little bit about homeostasis and feedback loops. I'm just going to play a little bit of it, and then we'll go back to our lesson.
Hi, it's Mr. Anderson, and welcome to Biology Essentials video number 18. This is on positive and negative feedback loops. If you've ever driven, you've probably seen a sign like this. This is a guilt sign. So they put the speed limit up here, and then they show how fast you're going down at the bottom. But you constantly get feedback as far as your speed goes. So you will see that you're going a little fast, and so you'll slow down. But then you'll realize you're slowing down way too much, and so then you'll speed up. And if it works out well, you'll hit that speed limit. Or that target set point. Now, what I'm just showing you here is what's called a negative feedback loop. In other words, you'll dance around that point. You'll speed up, you'll slow down, and eventually you hit that point. So a negative feedback loop brings you closer to the target set point. A positive feedback loop you would experience if you were to see this sign as a challenge. So you see you're going 30 miles an hour, so you realize I could go 39 or maybe 51. I could eventually get a ticket or break the sign. So that's a positive feedback loop. It's when you're amplifying and moving away from that target set point. So in this podcast, I'm going to start by talking about homeostasis, and that's our internal environment. And to maintain a stable internal environment, we use feedback loops. With each of those, you have a target set point. In a negative feedback loop, you're going to move above or below that, but try to stay as stabilized, and so you're as close to that as you possibly can be. Example I'll give you is temperature regulation in mammals. In a positive feedback loop, you move away from that target set point, so you amplify that. Example I'll give you is fruit ripening, why all the apples on a tree seem to ripen at the same exact time. Now with a feedback loop, you can always have mistakes. You can always have alterations in that feedback loop, and that can lead to tragedy. Example would be diabetes is a problem in creating insulin or sensing that insulin. And so that's just a problem in a feedback loop, and it can lead to really bad things. And so let's start with homeostasis. Homeostasis, if we were to define what it is, it's an internal stable environment. And so if you live in a pond, if you're a paramecium like this and you live in a pond, you let a lot of your environment just go, and you maintain that environment by just maintaining the same as the pond around you. So you have this external pond, and whatever the temperature of that is, that's the temperature of the paramecium. Now they'll regulate a few things like water concentration using contractile vacuoles, but mostly they have a pond. Now, as we move out of the pond, or as we become more sophisticated, we kind of bring that pond with us. That internal pond now is what homeostasis is. And so this is a hairless cat. Hairless cat is going to maintain its body temperature, and so it does that through feedback loops. It's going to maintain its blood glucose level. It does that through feedback loops. It's going to maintain the osmolarity of its blood. It does that through feedback loops. Now, hairless cat doesn't have hair, and so it's actually hard to maintain its internal body temperature, and so you don't want to let them go outside on their own. They'll lots of times put a coat on so they can maintain that. Now, there are kind of two life strategies. In this picture, it'll take you a second to figure out what it is. This is a snake eating a rat, and it's taken with a thermal image camera. And so the snake itself is what's called an ectotherm, and what that means is that their internal temperature is going to be the same as their external temperature. So the snake is about the same as, whatever the counter that it's sitting on. But the mouse is going to be an endotherm, and so that is going to keep an internal temperature that's going to be constant. Now there's some advantages. If you keep an internal constant temperature, then all the metabolism will work at the same exact rate. The problem with that is that the rat right here is probably going to eat a lot more than that snake just to maintain that body temperature. So let's see how that works in a mammal. And so in humans, we use a negative feedback loop to maintain our constant body temperature. And so our constant body temperature is around 37 degrees, or about 98.6 degrees Celsius. And so we use a negative feedback loop to maintain that. So let's say we put a thermometer in this kid's mouth, and the temperature all of a sudden increases. Now you actually sense that. The area where we sense that is on the roof of our mouth, in an area, an extension of the brain called the hypothalamus. And so we're going to sense that temperature change. And so what's the first thing that your body does when you start to get too hot is that you're going to sweat. And so what does that do? Well, as these water molecules evaporate, that's going to create evaporative cooling. In other words, they're going to carry a little bit of heat with them. You'll also start to vasodilate. In other words, the blood is going to be carried towards the surface of the skin. And so then just through convection, we're going to start to lose more of that heat to our environment. Now, another thing that would happen if we had fur, which we don't really have, is that fur is going to lay really flat. And the reason why is that then we can have more of that heat being lost through convection. So what does that do to our temperature? Well, it's going to drop. But it might drop a little bit too far. So then we're going to turn those things off. We're going to quit sweating, and we're going to quit vasodilating. But now we're too cold. So what do we do? How do we keep ourselves warm? Well, we're going to start to maybe get goosebumps. And these are kind of crazy goosebumps. But we're going to get goosebumps right here. And what goosebumps do is if we had hair, it'd actually stand the hair up on end. But it also kind of pulls your skin in. It's like taking a coat and kind of pulling it in, and it's conserving that heat. We're also going to vasoconstrict. In other words, we're going to shut off those capillary shunts, and we're going to hold that blood in towards the inside of our body to maintain that. And as a result of that, we're going to have less convection, and our body is going to increase until we hit that target set point. And so right now, in fact, throughout the whole day, your body is just regulating your body temperature, and it's doing that through a negative feedback loop, again, trying to maintain that target set point. What happens if we want to go in the opposite direction? Well, let's say we have this. So we've got a fruit on a tree.
Okay, and while this is fascinating, we're not going to talk about plants. Instead, let's go back to our human examples here and build on what Paul Anderson is talking about. Okay, so the goal of our body is to not just be whatever our environment is around it, right? We are not the pond. We are the same roughly internal conditions no matter what is happening outside of our body. And so that concept is called homeostasis. In order to maintain homeostasis, we are constantly adjusting to different stimuli. So this here is a diagram that you will see variations on this diagram as you go through this class. But essentially, this is what we want to be, homeostasis. So normal body temperature is the classic example here. Okay. If homeostasis is disturbed, right, so specifically, the body temperature rises. Right, so you guys are sitting on the beach and it's super hot outside, and it's hotter than 98.6. And so how exactly does your body, first of all, know that there's a problem? Right, so our body first has to detect that it's super hot outside because on the beach, right? So the receptors, right, which are a type of nerve cell, or a part of our nervous system, are going to detect, oh my gosh, it's really hot. And so they're going to relay this message up to a central control center in our brain. Okay, so this control center is going to receive this information, it's really hot. How do we respond? How do we fix the problem? We don't want to cook in the sun. And so just like Paul Anderson was saying, the hypothalamus is going to send a message to what are called effector tissues. Okay, so these are the tissues that are responsible for fixing the problem. This is the information coming in. This is what decides how we respond, and the effector tissues are going to fix the problem, right? We want to maintain this. This has been disturbed, and so these are going to fix the problem. They're going to restore homeostasis. And again, just like Paul Anderson said, vasodilation is going to occur, so essentially allowing a lot more blood to the surface of our skin. This, of course, makes our skin look red because of that additional red blood that we can see through the skin. And it turns on the sweat glands, allowing more and more fluid to be poured out onto the surface of our skin, which hopefully evaporates right away, unless it's later in the summer and it's super humid and then it takes a while. But ideally, sweat evaporates and brings with it a lot of the body's additional heat, and hopefully homeostasis is restored. Okay, and so this example is an example of negative feedback, right? So using that guilt sign on the road to essentially fluctuate around the ideal temperature, give or take a few tenths of a degree. Okay? Of course, for the most part, our body has a series of conditions within it that we maintain with this negative feedback, right? So it kind of puts the brakes on any condition from getting out of control. Okay, so temperature is pretty easy to understand, but this, of course, is occurring in a lot of different things in our body at the same time. And in fact, another theme that is going to come up again and again and again in AP 1 and 2 is the maintenance of homeostasis, right? Something has disturbed the target set point, disturbed the body from the target set point. How do we get it back? Okay. One example is blood pressure, right? So if blood pressure is allowed to get too low, essentially there isn't going to be enough pressure to pump the blood against gravity to our head, right? We really need lots of blood in our brain in order to control the rest of the body. So too low blood pressure means we're not getting enough blood. And if it's too high, on the other hand, essentially high blood pressure is going to push out on these blood vessel walls way more than they were designed for. And so over time, this weakens the blood vessel walls. You might get an aneurysm, you might have a heart attack. So really no good. Okay, so we need to maintain our blood pressure within a target range. And so our heart is, responsible for this, our blood vessels themselves, our brain, our kidneys, lots of things in our body are involved in maintaining this target set point. Okay. We need to have a certain amount of nutrients, right? So our blood sugar, for example, needs to be maintained within a certain range. If any of you are diabetic or know a diabetic, you know just how important it is to keep the blood sugar, right, with this meter here, you know, 70 to 100 or 120 if you're diabetic, very important, right? Too low of blood sugar means that your tissues are starving. Too high of blood sugar means that your blood is becoming syrupy and viscous. And again, it's going to put a lot of pressure on those poor blood vessel walls. Blood can't be pumped to our extremities like our eyes and our toes, our fingers. And so really, really important to have not too hot, not too cold, nice Goldilocks in the middle blood sugar. Okay, micronutrients as well, so vitamins, different types of minerals like calcium, sodium, etc. Really important, not too hot, not too cold, right in the middle. Also, pressure, right? So when we go up to the mountains or when we go scuba diving, the pressure around us changes quite a lot. And so this is going to change how many gases are able to dissolve in our blood. And so our body can respond to changes in pressure, but it's a little bit slow to do so. And so this is why when you go scuba diving, you go down really far, you have to come up to the surface fairly slowly, or at least stop and allow your body to acclimate before proceeding further to the surface. Because if you come up too quickly, your body cannot maintain this homeostasis quickly enough. And essentially, it's more or less like, you know, popping the tab on a can of soda or something. All of that pressure in the sealed can is pushing that carbon dioxide into the fluid. But as soon as you release that pressure, so open the top or come up to a lower atmospheric pressure when you're scuba diving, essentially all of those bubbles are going to be released out of your blood. They accumulate in your joints, and this produces a condition called the bends. Right? So take-home message here is that almost every factor in our body is maintained within a certain range by negative feedback. Positive feedback. There are several examples of this that do occur in our body. Just like Paul Anderson said, this is essentially looking at that guilt sign on the side of the road and seeing it as a challenge. And so instead of keeping approximately 30 miles per hour, you speed up and speed up and speed up. Okay, so this is accelerating out of control. And for the most part, the only times that this type of feedback occurs in the body is in emergency situations and other kind of niche situations like ovulation. Okay? So emergency situations, for example, you cut yourself, right? Damaging your blood vessel is going to allow all of that lovely blood that's chock full of oxygen, nutrients, and all the lovely things we need to get to our body. It's going to let that blood out. Obviously not ideal. So the goal is to plug up that hole as quickly as possible so that we minimize the blood loss. Now there are chemicals that are released by the damaged tissue that are affected by this abrasion here. And so those chemicals are essentially going to cause what are called platelets to stick together. So those platelets kind of like gum up and they produce that first step of the scab, right? The one where like you wash the cut, it just comes right back off. So the gummy platelet plug stage. But once those platelets are there, every time a new platelet sticks together, it's going to release chemicals, right? And so another platelet's going to come, it's going to release more chemicals and another and another and another. And so all of these different platelets together are going to produce this positive feedback, this exponential growth in the formation of the clot, right? And actually accelerates the process of forming this scab itself using that gummy platelet plug, kind of as a framework. Okay, so again, emergency situation, we need to stop blood loss as soon as we physically can. And so we don't want a little bit of a clot and then we're going to pull it back. And then a little bit of, no, we want to form the clot, form the scab as quickly and thoroughly as possible. Okay. Another example is childbirth. Right? So at the end of a pregnancy, levels of hormones and chemicals surpass a certain level and essentially, again, produces this exponential growth in response, right? So more contractions and more contractions and more contractions, more, propulsion of the fetus towards the birth canal, and essentially, once the process of childbirth begins, you don't want to exert negative feedback, right? You don't want a little bit of childbirth and no, I changed my mind. A little bit of childbirth, no. We don't want to fluctuate around a target set point. You want childbirth or not, right? So that's why we would have positive feedback during the birthing process. Okay. Again, take home message, almost everything in our body is regulated by negative feedback, except for a few kind of dire circumstances, such as loss of blood and childbirth. Okay. Again, just like Paul Anderson said, any disturbance to our ability to have negative or even positive feedback results in disease, right? So for example, if you have not enough blood clotting, this can be really bad, like any minor paper cut can cause you to bleed out, right? So normally you get a cut, you form a platelet plug, you form a true scab, the blood loss is stopped and your tissue can heal. Individuals with hemophilia have a mutation in one of the genes involved in the blood clotting pathway. And so you'll learn more about this next semester, but essentially, this is a protein coded for by a gene, and this is a protein, and this one, and this one. And so all of these different things have to be perfect. So your genes have to be perfect in order to go from we have a cut all the way down here to we have a clot or a scab, right? So people with hemophilia have a mutation in one of these here. And so that is going to stop this entire chain reaction. And so they cannot produce a full clot, right? So disease, hemophilia, is produced by the inability to maintain homeostasis, just the right amount of blood clotting. Right? On the other hand, if you have too much clotting, right, and this might be a little bit more familiar to all of us, if you have too much clotting, you start forming blood clots in your vessels, right? So for example, this here is atherosclerosis, a blood vessel with a fatty plaque due to genetics, due to cholesterol imbalance. A lot of different things can play into this, but essentially these plaques form on the inside of the blood vessels, and platelets can start sticking together on this plaque. And so they form the same kind of chain reaction, producing this clot in the blood vessels. And of course, that can block the flow of blood to other organs, which again, no bueno. I am not sure why I'm having trouble seeing this today. Sorry, guys. I'm going to use my computer in the future. Yeah, no worries. No worries. Sorry. Again, I'll use my computer in the future, so this won't be an issue. Okay. Okay, so as I said multiple times already, it's, learning anatomy is really like learning a new language. When you first see terms, they will seem big and clunky and scary, but we can break them all down into their individual roots. And so if you've taken medical terminology or have some kind of background in A&P already, great, that's wonderful news. But I encourage all of you to find these types of charts, right? So roots, prefixes, suffixes. There's one in the back of the textbook that I recommend, but also in any other textbook as well. And so you're going to want one of these as a reference. Okay? I give you some here, but surely there are a lot more than it. Now, whenever we talk about the human body, we always refer to structures relative to each other as if the body was in what is called anatomical position. Okay? So anatomical position is this, right? So standing up straight, hands all the way at the sides, right? And Normally, when you put your hands at your sides, your palm kind of touches your thighs, but in anatomical position, instead of your palm touching your thighs, instead the thumb points out laterally. So it points out to the right and to the left. Okay, so your palm is facing forward. Okay, and essentially what this does is it makes sure that the two bones in your arm aren't crossing over one another. Okay, instead they are nice and parallel to each other, so we can see all of the muscles nice and straight, all the nerves, all the blood vessels nice and easy to see in your arms. Okay. Also, legs side by side, hip width apart, with the toes facing front. So that is anatomical position. So when we are talking about the human body, even if we're talking about someone who is hanging upside down off the monkey bars, when we refer to structures, we talk about them as if they were in anatomical position. Again, even if you're upside down, we use the terms we're about to go over as if the person was standing like this. Okay. We can talk about a person that is lying down. We can say that they are laying on their back, that is, they're supine, or they're laying on their stomach, they are prone. I always remember this by thinking about if I had soup, if I was cupping soup in my hand, right? If I was laying on my stomach, the soup would just pour out. But if I was laying on my back, I could actually hold the soup to the extent that I could in my hand. So supine, laying on your back, you can hold the soup without spilling. Another note while we're here, something I do with all of my PowerPoints is I highlight in blue and underline the terms that are most important to know. Okay, so as we go through this, I'm throwing tons and tons and tons of terms at you, but the ones that are most important to learn are blue and underlined, or some variation of blue. So if you are a type of person to make flashcards or something, these are the ones you should focus on. So again, when we talk about the human body, we always talk about the body as if it was in anatomical position. On top of that, we use directional terms. Right? For the most part, these directional terms are used to say this relative to that, right? Or they are used to describe or as part of the name of a particular structure. Okay, so let's walk through some of these and I'll give you some examples. We'll start with superior and inferior. Okay, superior means to the top of, right? Up above to the top, as opposed to inferior means below. Okay. So the reason that these terms are so important is because if this person was laying supine and you were making an incision, right, if you want to say, make the incision, closer to the head, right? You couldn't say above because maybe that means closer to the top of the skin, right? Maybe that means closer to the top of this particular organ, right? So these directional terms are very specific, right? So if you want to say, make the incision in this direction, you could say, make it more superiorly, closer to the head, as if the woman was in anatomical position. Okay. Similarly, you could say the knee is superior to the ankle, right? The knee is closer to the top, closer to her head than the ankle is. The ankle is therefore inferior to the knee, okay? So we can use these to compare two terms, two structures in space. Okay. Similar pair of directional terms. Cranial means closer to the head. Caudal means closer to the tail or the tailbone. Cauda means tail. So a term or a structure can be cranial and superior, right? So the elbow is cranial to the wrist. The elbow is also superior to the wrist. Okay. The difference between these, however, superior, inferior, cranial, caudal, is that caudal is referring to the tail, right? So these terms are really only used with the torso and the head. right? As opposed to superior and inferior can be used for the entire body. Okay. Another pair of words, posterior or posterior and anterior. Okay. Anterior means to the front on the face side. Posterior or posterior means on the back side. Okay. These terms are synonyms. They mean the same roughly thing on a human as ventral and dorsal. Dorsal specifically means the back. Ventral specifically means the belly side. Right, I say that these terms mean the same thing on a human because humans, of course, are standing on 2 feet, right? Bipedal, bipedal. So the front of our body, the face side, is the same as our belly side. As opposed to a cat, for example, which walks on all fours, its belly side is inferior, right? It points down. It is inferior to the cat's back. So ventral points inferiorly on a cat, but the anterior of the cat, the face side, right, is not on the belly, right? It's facing forward. Those distinctions are going to be important next semester when you guys dissect cats, if you're going to be around the fall. But for now, for human purposes, anterior is the same as ventral, posterior is the same as dorsal. Okay. Next, proximal and distal. These terms generally refer to the limbs. Okay. So proximal means closer to the body. Distal means farther away from the body. So the palm is distal to the elbow. The shoulder is proximal to the elbow. Again, mostly referring to the limbs. Medial and lateral. Medial is closer to the midline of the body. Lateral is farther away from the midline of the body. So the belly button, right, is medial to the hip bone. And we can also use these terms on individual limbs. Right, so the pinky is medial to the thumb. The thumb is lateral to the ring finger. Final pair of directional, well, second to final pair. Superficial versus deep. Superficial is closer to the skin. Deep is farther and farther into the body. So again, if you're making an incision, the scalpel starts out superficial and it gets deeper and deeper into the body. Okay, similarly, if you look at the heart, right, the outside, that is the superficial surface of the heart, but as you go deeper into the chambers, that is getting deeper. Okay? And the final pair of terms here, right and left. Note that these are not your right and left, right? If this is my, this side is my right, but it says left. So it's always patient's right and left. Okay? So generally I end up like turning around and like thinking, oh, okay, well, this is my left and that is my right. And so that's what the patient's right and left would be. For the test, I would ask questions about this content. Something like this, right? The thumb is something to the pinky, right? I've used more complicated terms than this, we're getting there. But the thumb is what to the pinky, right? And so you could say the thumb is lateral to the pinky. Okay? Something like the knee is what to the hip bone. And so a couple answers here, right? So the knee is both inferior, right? It's underneath the hip bone. But also you could say the knee is distal to the hip bone, okay? Because it's farther from the body. Any questions about that? Okay, hopefully no news is good news. All right, and so the body regions. Just as I said before, learning anatomy is a new language. We use particular terms to talk about different spaces on the body, and we do this to be efficient, right? So we're not just saying the arm, right, the upper arm, but we can be a lot more specific than that. Learning these regional terms is really going to help you learn the muscle names, the bone names, the brain lobes, like lots of different things in the body are named according to their region, which is great because once you learn these, it'll help you learn those. But also, if you don't know a term, but you see the word cranial in it, right, just like you guys did earlier today in your breakout rooms, you can use these context clues to figure out at least approximately where you should be looking. Okay. What I'm going to do now is stop sharing my screen, and I am going to actually physically draw on this. So this should look pretty familiar to you. First of all, you played with it in your breakout groups earlier today. Secondly, I gave you two different versions or two different file types of this document in today's entry on Blackboard. I am going to walk through the terms that I've given you that are listed over here, and I'm going to draw them in on this blank body diagram. Okay? What I would recommend doing is following along, annotating this in whatever way you want, right? You can use it on PowerPoint, or you can throw it into Google Slides just like you did earlier today. If you have it printed out, cool, okay? But you're essentially going to be making a key of where all these different regions are on the blank body diagram. Then what I would recommend doing in order to study this content is to take your labeled diagram and slip it into one of these plastic sheet protectors, okay? So that one side is nice and labeled, and on the other side, you have a blank one, right? So what you can then do is on the blank side, write in where you think the different terms are, what the different structures are, flip it around, check your answers. Once you've checked your answers, wipe off that expo marker and then do it again. Okay, so learning the spelling, learning to recall this information from your memory, and of course not using an entire forest of trees. Okay. Questions about that? All right. So do this with you. So you should have the list of terms available for you on the PowerPoint. Okay. One other note that I want to make before I start, the list of terms that I've given you on the PowerPoint has some terms are all the way to the side and other terms are indented. Right? So this one's all the way to the side, this is indented here, and so on and so forth. These terms that are all the way to the side are kind of like the bigger regions. Okay, so they are the ones that encompass all of these sub-regions right here. Right? So we're going to start with that. We're going to start with the cephalic region. Within the cephalic region, the first one to note is the frontal region. Right? So this here is frontal. Okay, so the forehead is the frontal region. Okay. Orbital. The orbit is another name for the eye socket. So orbital is the region of the eye. Some of these are like really obvious, right? So the nose, for example, is nasal. Mouth is oral. The next one on the list is cranial. So I want to point out that this is one of those words that gets confused all the time. Make sure that you study this accordingly. Cranial is essentially where your brain is. It's your brain case, okay? As opposed to cephalic, and that's what this is all about here. So cranial, this is just your brain case. So the flat bones of your skull. Cephalic is the entire head. Okay, and I know those get confused all the time. Cranial, just your brain case. Cephalic, the whole head, including your face. Okay. Next one is maybe not as intuitive as some of these others. The chin is called mental. All right, so the way that I always remember this is I think about the statue, the thinker, right? So he's sitting there like on a rock and he's got his chin in his hand. He's thinking so hard. He's got so much like mental stuff going on. But his chin or his mental region is in his hand while he's having lots of mental stuff going on. So any way that you can connect this content back to what you already know and already understand, the better off you'll be. I will bring up what works for me. Laugh if you want, but however you can remember it, good enough. Next, the ear is otic. The posterior side of the skull, occipital. Okay. The next two terms, there's a little bit of not necessarily as clear as some of these others. Nuchal is like the back of the neck. And cervical is sometimes referring to the entire neck and sometimes just referring to the front of the neck. So just for clarity, I'm going to write these on opposite sides here. Cervical, the neck in general, and nuchal is just the back of the neck. Next terms are in the thoracic region. The thoracic region is essentially your chest. And it is a major region, which includes pretty much your chest superior to your diaphragm. Right? So this little line right here is your diaphragm. Right? And so your chest down to your diaphragm is the thoracic region. Within the thoracic region, your sternum, your breastbone, gives rise to the name sternal. So in the region of your breastbone, this is your sternal region. The armpits. This is called axillary or axillary. Okay. And you'll hear me all the time say words a couple different ways, a couple different times, depending on who you're learning from, particularly if they're European. Some of these words are said in different ways. As for me, as long as you are spelling these words correctly, you can say it however you want. Okay? So if you say it's super weird in your head just to spell it right, okay, that's cool with me. On that note, sometimes I will say it how it's spelled too. All right, final part of the thoracic is mammary. Right, and because I just messed that up a little bit, M-A-M-M-A-R-Y, mammary is the breast region. On the posterior side, the back is conveniently called the dorsal region. All right, again, this is a major region, which includes a lot of sub-regions. Okay, specifically, the shoulder blades, which is what these guys are right here. This is called scapular. And of course, there's two, one on each side. The spine, or specifically the thoracic spine, we're getting there. So the entire spine down to these funny little lines here. This is called the vertebral or vertebral, because it's made up of a lot of vertebrae. Okay. The lower back, which maybe we're all familiar with, lumbar, right? Your car seat has lumbar support. Your lumbar hurts because you lifted with your back instead of with your legs, something like that, right? The lumbar includes the lumbar spine, but also the rest of the entire back, and it kind of even wraps around up here. We'll get there. Final sub-region within the dorsal is this kind of little triangle section right here, named for the bone that is in this region. This is sacral or sacral region. Okay. Next, gluteal. The buttocks region is the gluteal region, and it is named for the gluteus maximus, medius, and minimus, 3 muscles. The next term on the list actually can't be seen in either of these perspectives. I'm going to put a little star. Pair if with an I, kneel. This is the region between the genitals and the anus. Okay, next, flipping back around to the anterior side, the abdominal region. All right, maybe this is one you know already. Essentially, your stomach region, your abdomen, is collectively called the abdominal. Now, on your list, the only sub-region that I give you is the umbilical, with 1 L region. This is certainly not the only region within the abdomen. In fact, on the very next slide that we're going to go to, we're going to look at a lot of sub-regions within the abdominal as well. Okay, but this is the one that we can see pretty easily on this diagram. Next, pelvic. All right, so pelvic is essentially a major region of the pelvis. All right, so your hip bones. Within the pelvic, is the groin, is inguinal, and finally, the genitals are called pubic, named for the pubis bones deep to the skin. Okay. Any questions about these?
I have a question as to where to find the PowerPoint on Blackboard. I remember you showed us earlier, but I don't know if I'm on the wrong Blackboard or what.
So let me pull it up for you. And this is going to be the way it is all the time. So this is what you see when you first log in. everything you need to learn AMP is under course resources. Everything you need to test in AMP is under assessments. So exam 1 content, that's where we are right now. This is today. And so all of the links, all of the instructions, and here are the notes, the PowerPoint notes, and then 2 different versions of the body diagrams I'm going over. So these over here.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Awesome, no worries. Any other questions? Right. So those are all like the torso and head regions. In the interest of space, I'm just going to use a new diagram. And now we're going to do the limbs. Okay. So we're going to start with the upper limb or upper extremity. Again, this is a term that is all the way to the side. And so this therefore is a major region. Okay. Within the upper limb, we have the acromial. Okay, so if you run your finger along your shoulder here and out towards a nice curvy part of your shoulder over here, which is the deltoid, you'll feel that there is a little bump of bone, like right here. Okay, that bump of bone is actually called the acromion. And so the shoulder is acromial. The upper arm, right, so where your biceps would be, this is called brachial. The next pair of terms are both talking about the elbow, but opposite sides of the elbow. The anterior side of your elbow, this is called ante with an E, cubital. And the posterior side, into the pointy part of your elbow. This has 2 different names. In anatomy, I will say this all the time, but why name something once if you can't name it 2 or 3 times? Here is the first of many examples of that. Olecranon or cubital. Okay, either term is correct. The forearm, ante with an E, not I. It's not anti, it's not against the upper arm, it's antebrachial. And the wrist is named for the very special 8 bones of your wrist. This is called carpal. Next, the entire hand is called manus or manus. This is, again, it's the entire hand. So if you're doing manual labor, manus manual. The thumb subregion within manus is pollex. The posterior side of your hand, all right, so if you run your fingers along the back of your hand, you actually feel 4 bones and tendons going to each of your 4 fingers here. Those are called your metacarpal bones. And so we call this region metacarpal. The palm, so the anterior hand, And again, always talking about the person in anatomical position. The palm is on the front, the anterior, metacarpal is on the back, the posterior. Conveniently, the palm is called palmar. And finally, the fingers, the four fingers here, are digital. Lower limb, the leg or lower extremity. First term is coxal. So coxal is talking about, or is referring to the hip bone, which is called an os coxa or ossicoxy. So the hip bone itself, right? This is therefore the coxal region. The thigh, the bone that is in the thigh is called the femur with a U. The region of the femur, right? Femur is a noun. The region describing where the femur is femoral. And again, this is an adjective describing something. Patellar. Right, just like the elbow had a different name for the front and the back of the joint, the knee also does. The kneecap is called the patella. So patellar is the region of the kneecap. As opposed to the posterior knee, this is called popliteal or popliteal. The next three terms are actually referring to different parts of the shin and calf. Okay, so just the lower part of your leg, three different terms. Okay. I'm going to start with the lateral side, okay, which is not the next term on the list, actually. So the lateral lower leg. This is called fibular. And because the fibula is the bone that is on the lateral side of the lower leg. Alternatively, you can say peroneal. Right, again, not with an I, but peroneal. The next two terms. Crural starts with a C. Sural starts with an S. These terms are referring to the shin, which starts with an S, and C, which starts, and calf, which starts with a C. However, the terms are switched. It's exactly backwards from what you'd want it to be. Crural starts with a C, but it's talking about the S word, the shin. Crural is shin. Sural starts with an S, but it's talking about the calf, which of course starts with a C. So again, they're just switched. So posterior lower leg is sural, anterior lower leg is crural. And I know those are hard to say. I don't make this stuff up. Okay, so pedal or pedal. If you're a pedestrian, you're walking on your feet. So the pedal or pedal is your entire foot. Specifically, the ankle, oops, sorry, is tarsal. Just like up here, carpal is the joint, metacarpal is part of the hand itself. Here, tarsal is the joint, it's the ankle, and the superior part of the foot is metatarsal. The heel, named after the heel bone, calcaneus. The bottom of the foot, so the sole of the foot, is what is planted on the ground when you are standing up straight. Plantar is the bottom of the foot, the sole. Just the big toe. All right, thumb has a special name. Yeah, thumb is a special name. Big toe has a special name, hallux. And finally, just like in the hands, the toes are also called digital. Wow, that is not very different. So just the toes, digital. Any questions about any of those? And again, what I recommend is slipping these into a plastic sheet protector. All right, there's your answers. Maybe make it like nice and neat, not just like thrown together from within class. On the other side of this, have a blank document. So here it is blank. You'll kind of sketch in where you think all of the different regions are, check it, go back, erase. And you can do that over and over again, and that will definitely help you to learn all of these structures.
Do you mind sliding the paper up a little bit?
Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Don't worry. We good with these over here?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, no worries. Huh. All right, so as I said before, the abdominal region has a lot more going on in there than just the umbilical region. So here I want to break it down a little bit more for you. The abdomen, of course, is where a lot of your visceral organs are located. So if you have a pain up here, that's indicating a very different organ than a pain way down here. So we break down the abdomen into not only quadrants, but sub-regions. Right? So we'll start with quadrants because they're a little bit easier. You can draw hypothetical lines, one vertical, one horizontal, intersecting at your belly button, your navel, right upper, left upper, remember always patients, not yours, right lower, left lower. Right? So those are just simple old quadrants, right, 4 of them. Ones that are used a little bit more commonly are the regions. There are 9 sub-regions within the abdominal. We can break up these regions by drawing a hypothetical horizontal line from hip bone to hip bone. So these are your little hip points here. One line from hip to hip. One line at the bottom of your rib cage across. Okay. And the two vertical lines extending straight down from the nipples. So that makes 9 total regions. We know the umbilical. Lumbar, as I said, the lumbar region actually extends a little bit anteriorly, a little bit to the front. And so right lumbar and left lumbar. Okay. Next, the coxal bone, the os coxa, is your total hip bone, which is actually made up of 3 sub bones, right? So 3 bones that are infused together. The hip points themselves, right? So when you put your hands on your hips, that is called your iliac bone, your ilium. So the right hip bone is the right iliac, the left is the left iliac, right? So pretty straightforward so far. Next, gastric, right? One of the root words that hopefully you will learn over time. Gastric means stomach. So something to do with stomach, something to do with stomach, okay? The other clues that we have here are the prefixes hypo and epi. Epi means on top of, and that's one that's going to come up again and again. So epigastric is on top of the stomach, and lo and behold, here is the stomach. Hypo means less than or under. So this is under the stomach, so as far away from the stomach as you can be. Epigastric, above the stomach, below the stomach. Okay, and finally, we have the hypochondriac regions. And so you might think hypochondriac, that's someone who, thinks that they have every illness under the sun, right? How is that connected to this? Well, let's break it down. We see hypo, right, which means less than or under. And then we see chondro. Chondro actually means cartilage. And so I want to point out that your ribs are only partially bone. The bone is attached to your sternum with what are called costal cartilages. These cartilages allow your chest to be flexible so you can breathe in and breathe out. So this region is literally hypo, under, chondro, cartilage. Okay, so hypochondriac literally means it's under the cartilage. Now, how did that come to be called, how did hypochondriac come to be called, mean people think they have all sorts of different conditions? Well, if you are a hypochondriac, you are often saying, oh, my stomach hurts, or my stomach is in pain. And so here is your stomach, right? And so you're grasping at your left hypochondriac region as you are making up all these hypothetical conditions. Okay, so right and left, hypochondriac, under, cartilage. A few more sets of terms to go through just for a common vocabulary at approaching the body. Body planes. So these are flat surfaces along which a structure or body can be cut either in real life, right, with a knife, or hypothetically. There are 3 cardinal planes. First is the frontal or coronal, right? We're naming something once if we can't name it 2 or 3 times. So the frontal essentially divides the body into front and back. Okay, so right in this direction. Sagittal plane divides the body vertically into right and left parts, right? And I always remember sagittal, again, maybe super nerdy, but SAG, 1G, the 2 T's are kind of making an arrow, right? So kind of making an arrow like this. If you guys have watched Avatar, The Last Airbender, not the blue people one, but Avatar, The Last Airbender, he's got a blue arrow right here, which is actually going along the sagittal plane, right through the middle. To this day, that is how I remember how to spell sagittal and where it is, for better or worse. Transverse means horizontal. Right, so you can have a transverse plane here or here or here, but essentially it divides the body into top and bottom. We can make sections or cuts, again, hypothetically or for real, along these different body planes. So rather than talk about cutting up human tissue, let's talk about an apple, right, a little more benign here. A transverse section. So if you were to make a transverse section of this apple, you would take a knife and you would cut the apple like this. And so you could look into the apple and you could see a perspective that looks like this. On the other hand, you can take a knife and cut along the mid-sagittal section, right? So cutting the apple straight in half like that, okay? And this different section will give you a completely different perspective than the transverse section did, okay? The apple is symmetrical, so a frontal section would give you the same perspective as a mid-sagittal section, but essentially frontal would be cutting straight through the screen. Okay, and finally, we don't have to confine ourselves to these 3 cardinal planes. We can also make an oblique section, right? So that's pretty much taking the knife and like cutting it at a random wacky angle. And again, this gives you a completely different perspective. And with all of these different perspectives, we can learn a lot more about the tissue. Now, in terms of humans, right, we can of course make sections with a knife or with an imaging technology along any of these planes or oblique. And so knowing what these planes look like and where exactly they are in the body really helps us to understand the tissues that we're viewing. So, for example, these are 3 different scans of a brain. Let's see, this one here, it says SAG. It's literally telling us that this is a sagittal plane. So this is sectioning through the brain, hypothetically with an imaging technology. So we are looking at the right half of the brain. Okay, this of course is showing us completely different structures than if we take a frontal section. Okay, here we can see both hemispheres. We can see the corpus callosum. We can see lots of different things that we couldn't see over here. Okay, and finally, this is a transverse section. Again, we can see completely different things. And so as medical professionals, and even just as the proud owner of a human body, we are seeing sections all the time, and to know where they are is very helpful in understanding what you're actually looking at. Okay. The other way that this is helpful is that a lot of the models in the labs say, you know, this is a sagittal section through the head, right? This is a transverse section through the torso, right? If you don't know what those words mean, you don't have any idea where you're actually looking in the body. Images in your textbook are the same. Okay. Final big concept of the day. Again, thank you guys so much for sticking it out. I know that today is a long one and it won't be this long in the future, but body cavities. Okay. Our skin, of course, separates our internal conditions from the outside world, but even within our body, we have different confined spaces, these cavities that are filled with fluid that are completely isolated from other parts of our body. Within these cavities, we can maintain things like ion concentrations, we can maintain different types of conditions, temperature, etc., within the cavities themselves. We can break the body, or there are 2 main body cavities, the dorsal, which is on the back, and essentially that encases the entire central nervous system, brain, spinal cord, and the ventral body cavities. We're going to spend more time looking at the ventral body cavities now because there's a lot of sub cavities within them. Now, within the ventral body cavities, this is where we have most of our internal organs. The technical term for internal organs is viscera. Okay, so our visceral organs are contained in the ventral, on the belly side. The body cavities themselves are, for the most part, contained within a membrane, one of several types of serous membrane. Okay. A serous membrane it essentially acts kind of like this balloon here. Okay, so when you put your fist through a water balloon or through an air balloon, part of the balloon, part of that latex is going to touch your hand, right, which is representing the heart. And the other part of that balloon is going to be farther away. Separating this part of the balloon from this part of the balloon is a space of air. Serous membranes work exactly the same way. Part of the membrane is going to be firmly attached to the outside of the organ. We call that layer of the serous membrane the visceral layer, right? Viscera because it touches the viscera, the internal organ. The layer that is farther away from the organ is called parietal, and parietal is a root that means wall. So this is closer to the wall of your body. In between is not air, but a liquid, a fluid called a serous fluid. So the idea behind these membranes and the subsequent cavities that they produce is that they allow our organs to move around without the friction, without the rubbing and beating each other up that they otherwise would. So if you think about the heart, it is constantly contracting. It's always moving in our chest, right? From way before we're born until we die. So always moving. Wrapped around our heart is our lungs, right? And so if there weren't these two layers of protection around the heart, our heart would always be rubbing against our lungs and developing a lot of scar tissue, which is not functional for the heart. Okay. Also, especially in terms of the abdominal organs, these serous membranes actually secure our organs to the rest of our body. Right? If you think about the fact that our intestines are several feet long, every time we do jumping jacks or go for a jog or something, those intestines could, in theory, like form a knot. They could get all tangled. But that doesn't happen because the serous membrane actually organizes the intestines, allows them to move, right, and kind of push along our food and our feces without completely unraveling. Right? So it secures it to the side of the body. There are 3 different types of serous membranes. The first one is a pericardium. Right? So again, breaking these down into roots, cardio, right? We all do cardio or think about doing cardio, heart, or exercises that really involve our heart. So cardio is the heart. Peri, right? Around the perimeter of the heart is the pericardium. So this here is the pericardium. Each lung has its own serous membrane. Each of these membranes is called a pleural membrane. Right? I always remember this because there are 2 of these membranes. Like if you make something plural, you are making it multiple. So there are multiple lungs, multiple pleural membranes. And finally, peritoneum. This surrounds most of the organs of the abdomen, to be continued in just a moment. Perimeter, you like to tone your abs. Peritoneum is the serous membrane surrounding most of the visceral organs of your abdomen. Okay, so let's look at these in space, in our body. The ventral body cavities are divided into the thoracic cavity, which is superior to the diaphragm, which would be right here. Within the thoracic cavity, we have not 1, but 2 pleural cavities, right, around each of the lungs. And between each of the lungs is the pericardial cavity encasing the heart. And we can see this extra little space up here. That is actually the major blood vessels, superior vena cava, the aorta. Also, it is your trachea, your bronchi, your esophagus, all of these major vessels, major tubes going to or from the heart or behind the heart. Okay, so collectively, the space between the 2 pleural cavities is called the mediastinum, which encases the pericardial cavity. Right? I encourage you to go back and listen to that again. One of the other things that trips people up is structure versus region versus cavity, all of these different things. So again, serous membranes. Pericardial cavity is within the space, the mediastinum. Pleural cavities are around each of the lungs, both of which, or all of which, is located within the thoracic. Okay. Inferior to the diaphragm is the abdominopelvic cavity, right? This seems like a big, awful, clunky word, but let me point out that this is actually a compound word. Abdomino is the first part, so the abdomen. Pelvic, pelvis. Okay. The abdominal cavity itself contains the peritoneum, right? The third and final serous membrane. The peritoneum surrounds the stomach, the intestines, the spleen, the liver, but not everything. We're getting there. And the pelvic cavity. This contains most of the urinary structures as well as the reproductive organs. Okay. Collectively, abdominal and pelvic cavities are called the abdominopelvic. And retroperitoneal. This is a term that refers to organs that are not actually surrounded by the peritoneum, this third and final serous membrane. For some perspective, this is a sagittal section through the body. Okay, here's the diaphragm. So all of this down here is abdominopelvic. All of this here is thoracic. What we can see is the liver, the stomach, the intestines, all of which are surrounded by this membrane, right? We can see that between the two membranes, there's this brown space. Okay, so the pericardial cavity is the brown space. The white lines is the serous membrane. And again, we can see that it is actually securing all of these intestines, kind of hanging on from the back of your body cavity. However, if we look closely, we can see that there are some organs plastered all the way to the back of your body cavity that are not covered by the peritoneum. They include the pancreas, an endocrine organ, the duodenum, which is part of your small intestine. Also, the rectum, uterus, and urinary bladder. All of these are not covered by the peritoneum. Therefore, they are retro behind, right? If it's retro, it's in our past peritoneum. Okay. Another perspective here is a transverse section. It's a horizontal section through the abdominal cavity and the stomach, spleen, and liver. The pink is showing us the visceral layer of the peritoneum. The teal is the parietal layer of the peritoneum, so along the wall of the body. But if we look all the way to the posterior side, here's our spine, here are our back muscles, here are our abs. The kidneys are retroperitoneal. They are behind, they're outside the peritoneum. And finally, this is an image borrowed from your textbook that essentially just summarizes all of these different structures and body cavities together, and just for your own study purposes. And so, you made it through day one. Congratulations, everybody. I know that was a lot of new content. Hope you're still fired up about this class. For the rest of the day, I hope at some point you guys can try to access Mastering A&P. Again, masteringANP.com. You log in as a student and you give the code that is available in the syllabus as well as on Blackboard. I encourage you to look through that, get familiar with it, and start homework 1 if at all possible. I encourage you to familiarize yourself with where all the stuff is in Blackboard. And again, you can go back and watch this video as soon as Zoom processes the video and it's uploaded to YouTube and YouTube processes the video, then you'll be able to see the link to this recording from today's lecture in today's entry, right? So the same place that you got to today's Zoom link and all of the notes and everything from today, I'm going to add this link to that entry. And that's going to be the way it is for the rest of the term. No digging around or anything. Monday's stuff is in Monday's entry. Okay. If you have extra time, and I encourage you to get a head start if at all possible, everything for the rest of the week is already posted. You can start the chem stuff for tomorrow. You can start the histology lab for Wednesday, histology lesson on Edpuzzle for Thursday, or whatever you want. Just keep in mind that Tuesday stuff is due Tuesday, Wednesday stuff is due Wednesday, Thursday stuff